Scarlet Nexus is a new IP action RPG from Bandai Namco featuring Tales of alums Keita Iizuka as producer and Kenji Anabuki as director. To say this game came highly anticipated would be something of an understatement for a new IP in the genre, and by all accounts, it seems to have lived up to expectations, scoring very high critical praise as well as landing in the top 10 for sales on all platforms the week it released. That of course includes Xbox, where games like this are often not given the time of day. Seeing the attention the game got and the shift in mentality it represents for the genre and player bases across certain platforms definitely warms my heart and gives me renewed faith for the future of the genre. However, I can't say I was quite as high on this game as others seem to be. Now don't jump to taking that as me saying this game is bad. It's not. It's still very worth the play. The combat, which is both original and addictive, really carries the experience. But Scarlet Nexus trips up in other areas I tend to hold in very high regard. Experiences will also vary from console to console, with some seeming to be more stable than others. So keep in mind at all times, please, that I am reviewing the PlayStation 5 version of this game, and that the issues discussed herein may not apply to the last gen versions. With all that said, we're going to structure this review a little different than usual. To avoid front-loading this video with negativity, we're going to start with the things I love. From there, we'll move into the things that I'm mixed on, and finally to the things that really just didn't do it for me. So let's begin with Scarlet Nexus Combat.
Lead on, leave it to me. Thanks.
As an action RPG, Scarlet Nexus hits heights rarely seen in the genre, and with enough depth to keep a player engaged from start to finish. If I had to compare it to anything, it'd be a little bit of Astral Chain, and nobody freak out when I say this, a little bit of Tales of Zestiria. On the surface, we have our light and heavy attacks, which can be chained together and have their combo lengths extended using the brain chart here, which is where we get most of our upgrades as we go, spending our brain points earned through leveling up. We can jump and perform aerial combos, dash, run, dodge, perfect dodge to slow down time for a brief moment, and combine the jump and light attack to create an uppercut that launches enemies skyward. There's an item wheel here at the bottom left that we can cycle through with left and right on the D-pad and use items by pressing down. You can auto-lock onto enemies, though I found this causing issues, so I turned it off, opting for the manual lock instead. Further, we have a telekinetic ability, or rather psychokinesis, which allows us to grab and throw objects scattered around the environment at our enemies, or interact with objects in such a way that can create explosions, launch special QTE driven attacks, or even allow us to take continuous control of an object for a period of time and direct attacks at hordes of enemies ourselves. Some of these are kind of jank in a sort of idea factory way, but those ones are very rare. Where things start to get interesting is with those Tales of Zestiria elements. Where Zestiria allowed you to meld with your party members to temporarily gain new abilities, Scarlet Nexus simply lets you borrow their abilities on a timer. These abilities come in a wide variety and do loads to mix up the gameplay and offer a strategic edge to the combat. For instance, some enemies may revert into a protective state when you get too close, completely blocking access to their weak zones and becoming entirely impenetrable as a result. So you may want to go invisible to avoid their detection, or use hypervelocity to slow down time and down them before they realize you're even there. Some enemies further may douse you with water, in which case it's good practice to target them with electric attacks. Other enemies may do the same but with oil, to which fire may be a fine response. Though this can cause trouble for you as well, as those enemies that spit oil at you may start spitting really powerful fireballs instead. And the status effects in this game are nothing to mess with. Some of them will completely disable your ability to dodge and dash for short periods of time, which considering there's no real block button can be a major source of frustration. There is a lot to consider in every battle, and every enemy brings a unique challenge to the table, making it so that you have to flip from power to power in constant high-speed strategic decision making. Your party members are useful in more ways than borrowing their powers as well. At a trade-off to some of their energy, you can trigger special attacks that do loads to eat through enemy break gauges, the gauge you need to drain to down the enemy. Sometimes too, when special conditions are met, with a degree of RNG, you get the opportunity to call your allies to deal special attacks at no additional cost. Things get really fun later when you unlock the ability to mix and match your party's powers, 2 to 4 at a time, and you have 8 special abilities to choose from. Slowing down time is one thing, but how about slowing down time, using duplicate to create copies of yourself, then adding fire or electricity to your attacks all at once? This shit is like a drug straight into your brain. It just feels good. When enemies are down, you get the opportunity to perform a brain crush attack. These work work kind of like Yakuza's heat attacks, where they're triggered with a single button press and launch a pre-prepared animation to finish the enemy off. We also have two powered up modes, one that comes at a cost and another that doesn't. The one you get for free is called the Brain Drive Effect, and it triggers automatically. It simply needs to be charged up, which you'll do naturally as you fight. This mode buffs your character, speeding up attacks and lessening the costs of psychokinesis, though it only lasts for a short while. The other mode is called the Brain Field. This also requires you to charge it up, but does not activate on its own. This is your strongest mode, giving you near unrelenting powers over your psychokinesis, with massive damage boosts. However, the cost can be steep for the careless player. First, you'll lose the ability to take advantage of any other powers or types of attacks, relying entirely on your party to self-manage. Second, if you do not exit this mode prior to the timer on it running out, it will overstimulate and kill your character, resulting in a game over. It takes some work to unlock all the aspects of this gameplay, and it can be easy to entirely miss mechanics for a good chunk of time. But when it clicks, and it just feels so good. On the PS5, the haptic feedback and adaptive triggers do well to sell you on the weight of the objects you're picking up and throwing around. They also help to tip you off as to when certain abilities are available for you to use without so much as an on-screen prompt. All around, Scarlet Nexus combat is firing on all cylinders. I did find myself struggling early on with some bosses, having not yet fully wrapped my mind around the combat and controls, though as I got around that initial learning hump and it all became second nature, things got much easier. This was by far the thing the game done the best, though there were other things I really enjoyed about the experience. Enemy and character designs rank pretty high for me. I won't say they're all award winners or anything, some enemies are especially kind of goofy, but for every goofy enemy there's a twisted, ugly bastard that looks like it crawled out of the darkest depths of Silent Hill, and I am completely on board for that. The characters I found especially remarkable just in the fact that they're mostly all immediately identifiable despite wearing very similar outfits. Sometimes it feels like there's only so many anime faces and haircuts in the world of grounded non-Yu-Gi-Oh designs. So when you lose the ability to drastically differentiate your character's clothing, the task of making a cast this large feel unique, and it really is a very large cast, becomes extremely difficult, yet they threaded that needle with grace. Sound design too is top notch, and the character voice acting in both languages is pretty darn solid. There's also a massive amount of costumes and props to craft and unlock to modify your party's appearance with. I don't usually mess with these much on a first playthrough, but it's here for those that do. The costumes also translate into the cutscenes, which is always nice to see. The cutscene direction I'm sure some people will be divided on, but I mostly liked it. It kind of feels like a visual novel, just with more posing and lip sync than the average, and with certain bits and pieces here and there switching to fully animated in-game engine stuff. It's not going to be to everyone's taste, but I have no complaints about it.
Huh? Others?
Now this is where we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about some of the things that I'm more mixed on. So let's start this section with the bonding events and the characters themselves. So I mentioned already there is a very large cast here, and unfortunately this means many of them don't get much screen time in the main story. Because of this, character development across the story is somewhat lacking, or at least just not hitting as hard as I would like for a JRPG. There were many times early on characters would be showing up and announcing themselves as sudden villains, and I just couldn't bring myself to care as I spent so little time with them. Same for any other character who maybe finds themselves in harm's way early on. I found myself sitting there with a controller in hand like, oh no, not you. However, to make up for lacking screen time, we have the bonding events, which you can do between every chapter at your team's secret hideout. Now, I should have covered this in the last section, but I actually love the secret hideout. It's plain as day when you start, but the more gifts you give to your party members, the more it fills up, and it's damn charming to see them actually using the gifts you give to them. The bonding events that launch from here I also really enjoy, which, good thing I did, as seeing them all takes more than half the game's roughly 50-hour runtime. Some of the best character moments in the game are here, and it's because of the bond events I ended up loving characters like Gemma, though in the main plot he feels underutilized and sidelined. But despite loving the content of the bond events, I've included them in this section of the review for a reason. Because they're treated as optional and they really shouldn't be. If the bonding events only counted towards learning more about the characters and gaining random, infrequent, passive combat abilities, then maybe that would be fine. I would just accept that the characters don't shine that much in the story and move on. But fact of the matter is, some of the most useful active combat combat abilities unlock through these social events. Things that can really transform your every battle. So if you don't do the social events, you lose most of the character development and a sizable chunk of the combat. Considering that, I don't think this should have been optional at all. There shouldn't be this much writing on a part of the game that they present as being skippable. That said, I viewed every single Bond event I came across because I'm just about that life, so it didn't affect my playthrough any. But for those who aren't about this life, those who choose to heed how the game presents this type of content, well, they're gonna miss a lot more than they realize, and I don't think they'd be entirely to blame for it. The music in the game I'm also somewhat mixed on. It's actually all pretty decent, but if you ask me to hum a tune from the game in a week, I won't be able to hum a single note. It all just fits the game, but did not leave a lasting impression on me. The story is complicated, and I'll be talking about it again in a minute. But to start, let's just say we have dual protagonists, Kasane and Yuito. To fully experience this story, you'll need to beat the game twice, once with each character. After completing the game once, you can start the second route in New Game Plus mode, and beat Route 2 at a much faster pace if you desire. Which route you play first is up to you, but I'm going to highly recommend you start with Kasane's. Kasane is not nearly as newcomer-friendly combat-wise, but her storyline is much more coherent than Yuito's, and much better as a standalone arc. Unfortunately, and we're gonna be moving into things that I'm not so hot on now, Yuito's route is a bit of a train wreck. Check it out. So the problem with Yuito's route is that nothing is ever established before it's needed. The plot develops at a breakneck pace, and the ideas it has in play, while often pretty intriguing, feel like they're being created randomly on the spot and nothing ever has time to breathe. It is just a mess of strung together events that never get the opportunity to sink in, as by the time you understand the last thing they introduced, we're already well into the next. It may be refreshing to some this day and age who find the average JRPGs are getting a bit slow and bloated, but it's simply too far in the other direction. Now, it's not like the story doesn't make sense when all is said and done. It does. It just does a horrible job of setting the player up for anything it's trying to do. In that regard, I highly recommend doing Kasane's route first, where things are established at an acceptable rate, and the knowledge you gain there can help you navigate Yuito's train wreck later. That said, I will say some of the concepts in this game are a little too edgy at times and lead to some really awful dialogue, but it is what it is. If they just renamed some things, it'd be fine, but it's not a huge deal. The story otherwise is a little hard to just sum up, as the routes are quite different. But at its core, it's about a bunch of My Hero Academia type characters navigating their way through a governmental coup, the actions of a secret organization, thousands of years of lore ripped from Nier Automata, and slaying monsters from Silent Hill. Most of that shit probably sounds pretty cool, but boy is it slapdash together. The story pacing is by far my biggest issue with this game, though I did struggle a fair bit with some of the game's more technical elements. Now let me just say up front, the game runs smoothly FPS wise, and the visuals are clear as day despite some environments feeling rather messy. But I hit a number of other issues that made me feel there just wasn't that much attention to detail or care put into using the PS5's additional power. Starting with something simple, the culling distance is really underwhelming. I feel like at this point on the PlayStation 5, there's really no reason we should see so many objects spawning in like this. Detection on some things is quite off too, or simply doesn't exist.
Here we go!
Sometimes plane effects aren't lined up properly, like with this conveyor here. There's no reason after I step off of it that I should be getting grabbed like this, but here we are. Subtitles are sometimes slightly off from the spoken dialogue too. And you know, there's lots of small things like this that just add up over time and hurt more and more the more you see them. But then it gets worse when you actually start hitting glitches. After one fight on Kasane's route in Phase 6, I hit a black screen. The game wouldn't play the next cutscene. I had to skip it to get out of the lock. But that's okay, right? This stuff is rare enough and easy to ignore. But then I broke a save file. This save, right here, cannot be progressed on at all. Now, I knew when I made the save that it would be broken, so I saved it as an alt, and I didn't really lose much progress. But not everybody will know the signs, and not everybody will make this decision. And the fact of the matter remains, your save file can be completely and irreparably broken in Scarlet Nexus. So the lead up to this was actually a series of glitches. It started with a boss battle that I died in. Upon dying, I hit to retry, and the game spawned me somewhere beneath the map and completely out of bounds. I managed to find my way out by fast traveling. From there, I walked back to the boss fight. Upon entering the fight, the 3 people I needed to square off against had completely broken AI, but I could still deplete their health gauges, so I pushed on to see what would happen. Upon defeating them, nothing happened. No cutscene played, no key dropped, no route opened up. So I left the room, walked around a bit, visited other places, re-entered. The boss encounter mob was alive and well again. Only their AI was still broken, and this time I could not do damage to them. I backed out of the room again, made my alt save, closed out, reloaded, re-entered, and they're still like this. Permanently. At this moment, I cannot find a way to reset their AI. So if this was my only save file, my playthrough would be over. This is a straw that would break the camel's back for me, if it was my only save. Now, I'd like to stress once more here at the end, these issues don't seem to exist on every platform, and it seems most people on PS5 don't hit this many of them. In fact, I'm the only person I've seen that actually managed to break a save, though I know others have also hit broken AI bugs. I'm sure you'll see lots of people sounding off in the comments that they didn't experience any of this, and many may even get upset and feel like I'm making the game look worse than it really is. But these glitches, these performance issues, and this broken save are facts. These aren't my opinions. I'm obligated to show this and warn others that yes, there is a risk of breaking your saves. Slim though it may be, it can very clearly happen, and it happened to me. Now, would I still recommend the game? Hell yeah, I would, on the combat and bond events alone. It was actually a hell of a lot of fun. From start to finish, I loved fighting my way through it. Sure, the story trips over its own feet at the best of times, but the story stumbles so the combat can run. And man, does it feel good to pick up the controller and run along beside it. Do I think it fully earns the high praise it seems to have got? Obviously not. This is not a package that delivers on all fronts, and those technical issues really need to get fixed. We can't have this crap happening to paying players. But there's plenty of reason to pick it up and play regardless. And if it looks fun to you and you can deal with a mess of a story and 25 hours of bond events, then yeah, pick it up. It's pretty fun, I guess. What I'm trying to say is that Scarlet Nexus isn't really Scarlet Nex ass. It could just be better is all. It's definitely disappointing in some areas that I care deeply about, but man, did it surpass my expectations in others. And that's all I'm gonna say on Scarlet Nexus. Sure, I might not have liked it as much as some other people, but it's still a fantastic game. For certain aspects. Anyway, if you guys liked this video or found it useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to all of my socials and my Patreon support page are in the description below, and as always, folks, thanks for watching. I got a new looking back on video coming up soon. Look out for that.